My name is Nina Farnia. Thank you all for coming. It's really great to see some familiar faces in the room. It's also really great to see some not so familiar faces. So thank you very much for coming. Just so you know, there's a series, NLG and other organizations throughout the country are rolling out local Know Your Rights workshops, basically last week and this week. There's one in San Diego, I think tonight. There was one in DC last week. So our timing is really good, even though we're about 2 months after the initial raids happened. So I'm going to give you an update on exactly what happened in Chicago and Minnesota. On the morning of September 24th, Friday, September 24th, there was, the FBI showed up at the homes of 7 individuals in Chicago and Minnesota. 2 families in Chicago, and these are families with young children, and then 5 in Minnesota. Some are families, some are people who live with their partners. Those homes were heavily raided, intensely raided. In the case of one couple in Chicago, the FBI spent 12 hours there from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. collecting documents from their home. Documents, pictures, old postcards from very old girlfriends from the 70s, drawings that their children had drawn for their parents, all kinds of documents. Political documents, not political documents, tons of stuff. 14 that same day, 14, or right around that time, 14 individuals were subpoenaed to go before the grand jury in Chicago. 3 organizations were subpoenaed as well. The Arab American Action Network, which is a local community-based organization on the south side of Chicago, which I'll get to in a minute, and 2 organizations that are affiliated with the Anti-War Committee in Minnesota, or are the Anti-War Committee in Minnesota, something like that. They were subpoenaed to go before the grand jury starting October 4th and then through, I think, around October 20th. They all asserted, now I'm just talking about the 14 individuals here and not about the 3 organizations. They all asserted their Fifth Amendment rights, which basically means that they're saying that they're not going to go before the grand jury unless they're offered immunity. And John will describe more what that means when he comes up. They all asserted their Fifth Amendment rights, so then the government decided to temporarily withdraw the subpoenas to determine whether or not it would give immunity to folks. At that point, it decided it would not give immunity to anybody. And there was some conversation between the U.S. Attorney's Office and the attorneys of the activists about whether or not the government would give immunity to some folks. So it was actually willing to give some people immunity. It was not willing to give a lot of other people immunity. It decided not to give anybody immunity, presumably because they had collected thousands and thousands of documents, and they wanted the time to go through all these documents before they could figure out who to give immunity to. Last week, or the week before last, with 3 of the activists, 3 of the folks in Minnesota, and their names are Sarah Martin, Tracy Mom, and An Pham, and are asking them to go before the grand jury on these outstanding subpoenas. They will likely be asked to go before the grand jury in Chicago in the next 2 weeks. At that point, it will be, well, no. First, the government has to decide whether or not it's going to give these folks immunity. If it does, then they have to decide whether or not they're going to continue to assert their Fifth Amendment rights to remain silent, or if they're going to go before the grand jury. And if they go before the grand jury, they'll be asked questions about their political activities, their associates, and the international solidarity work that they've done. So this is some of the nuts and bolts about just to tell you about these 3 people who have been re-subpoenaed. Sarah Martin is a 72-year-old grandmother. She's got 5 grandchildren, I think. She's an executive board member of WHAM, Women Against Military Madness, in Minnesota. Tracy Mom is an AFSCME union organizer, and she's also a union member. She's younger, not 72. And then An Pham is a Vietnamese American affiliated with the Anti-War Committee in Minneapolis. All these individuals, the government alleges that all these individuals are connected to Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And they all, part of the subpoenas and the warrants, included in the subpoenas and warrants are allegations about relationships with FARC in Colombia or the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP. So this This is a direct attack on Marxists, on communists or socialists. It's also a direct attack on people who do international solidarity work with third world or countries of color, I guess, communities of color. And specifically, I think a direct attack on very influential organizing around Palestine. Organizing that has just over the last 5 years begun to really make some movement. These subpoenas are really attacking those folks. So now I'm going to get to the organizational subpoenas. I'm going to transfer to that. Like I said, the anti-war committee two anti-war committees in Minnesota are one. There were two subpoenas issued. I'm not sure, two organizations affiliated with the community. That's why I'm not sure what happened exactly. They were subpoenaed, and then the Arab American Action Network in Chicago was subpoenaed. The Arab American Action Network is a grassroots, community-based organization located on the south side of Chicago. It provides social services for blacks, Latinos, Arabs, Puerto Ricans, all kinds of folks that live on the south side. It also does community organizing work in those communities. The kinds of social services it provides include domestic violence support, after-school programming, summer programming. The after-school programming is for very little kids, and I mean, at any given point you can see like 20 or 30 kids running around. So this is your typical definition of a community-based organization that's been around for quite a while, for about 10 or, I think 10, no, more than 10 years. The subpoena of AAAN was a very broad subpoena. It asked for the organization's client files, the organization, I mean everything related to the organization. Luckily, they've been able to negotiate with this U.S. Attorney's Office so that they won't have to turn over these client files. But what I think is important to note is that folks are going to speak about this tonight, but these kinds of investigations devastate political movements, they devastate families, and they devastate individuals' lives, right? When they're targeted at community-based organizations with broad contacts in the community, they can also devastate communities. And that's part of what's going on here. So folks who are doing organizing and support work for AAAN around the country, folks that are part of the same funding networks, the same grassroots networks, who go to the same coalition meetings and the same retreats, are working very hard to make sure that AAAN's funding doesn't get lost throughout this process, that it can continue to run its community-based programs and initiatives. Let's see. In terms of the anti-war committees, those subpoenas for documents are also outstanding still, but it's not really clear what they want from those subpoenas because the FBI did raid those offices and they took everything. So it's not really clear why those subpoenas are still standing. So in terms of the three folks that have been subpoenaed, those three individuals are planning to file motions to quash the subpoenas. It's not clear when they're going to file those, but actually tomorrow I think we'll know when they're going to file those. It'll be in the next few weeks. And then I have two final points. So the U.S. Attorney in Chicago is Patrick Fitzgerald. Does people here know who Patrick Fitzgerald is? Yes. So he is the one that prosecuted former Governor Blagojevich of Chicago. He came from New York and he made a name for himself doing anti-terrorism work. He is the one that's kind of leading this investigation in Chicago and Minneapolis, but it's clear that it's being led from DC as well. So this is a very broad investigation and a very broad effort that when you look at the subpoenas and the warrants, you can see that they're looking for very far-reaching activity and political contacts really throughout the world. The last thing I want to mention is that one of the people who received an individual subpoena is Hatem Abu Deya. And Hatem is the only Palestinian who's been subpoenaed, and he's one of two people of color. Pham, who I mentioned earlier, is the other person of color. Hatem is the executive director of the Arab American Action Network, which is the organization I just discussed. And it is very clear that he is a target of this investigation. He's a very prominent leader in the Palestinian American movement here. He's involved in community organizing work. He's involved in international solidarity work. He's involved in grassroots movement building. And he's been doing this for a very long time. So it's important, because we know he's a target, it's important to recognize what they're trying to do. because losing him from the movement is a major loss for the Palestinian American cause. Just like when the LA8 folks were targeted in the 80s, and Mark Vanderhout will talk about this again, it was a major loss for the Palestinian movement then. So what we want to do is, when we do our organizing work, we want to ensure that all our, we give as many resources to this defense as possible, but that we also continue to do the political work that we've been doing. Because we don't want this effort to devastate our political causes the way it can and has in the past. I think that's it. Are there any other questions?